guess I will get started. I want to welcome you all this evening. My name is Joe Scrivenek. I am a distinguished professor of chemistry and biochemistry at Purchase. I have been at the college for, I've just finished now 42 years. So it's a great pleasure tonight to be able to introduce our speaker, Jill Bargonetti. Jill was a biology major at Purchase. She graduated in 1985. As I sit here, it's really kind of hard to believe that I've known Jill for so long, but I have, and it's always been a pleasure. I can remember Jill in my general chemistry class, in my biochemistry class. When Jill was at Purchase, she had two major interests, dance and the sciences, mainly biology. And she majored in both, and she received her BA in biology in 1985. After Jill left Purchase, she actually performed with a Harlem-based dance company, the Diane McIntyre Sounds in Motion. And a close colleague of mine and another mentor of Jill's was Elise Craddock. And I think Elise and I kind of conspired to really kind of try to get Jill to think about a career in the sciences. And I think Jill once told me that Elise actually helped her fill out her graduate school applications. So fortunately, Jill took our advice, and the rest really is kind of history, and really quite a history it is. Jill got her master's degree at NYU, her PhD at NYU. She did a postdoc at Columbia, where I think, if I'm not mistaken, she got interested in cancer biology, which is her field, and she became an assistant professor of biology at Hunter CUNY, and also appointment in the Graduate Center in 1994. And Jill chose CUNY because she really wanted to be a role model for people from underrepresented groups that were majoring in the sciences. Probably her first major award among many, many others was in 1997 when she was awarded the Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers from then President Bill Clinton. And the award was, I quote, for scholarly work in cancer-related studies of cell growth and gene expression and involvement of undergraduate, graduate, and especially minority students in the discovery process. Jill went on to become a full professor at Hunter. She is chair of the MCD PhD subprogram of the CUNY Graduate Center. She is well recognized in her field of cancer research. She serves on numerous national committees to evaluate science and policy. She also serves on an NIH study section. That's a group that is does approving or recommending, reviewing is the word I'm looking for, of grants. Since joining Hunter, she's maintained a very active research laboratory that's been funded by the National Science Foundation, Department of Defense, the American Cancer Society, and the National Institutes of Health. In addition to the Early Career Investigator Award, Jill received the New York City Mayor's Award for Excellence in Science and Technology, the New York Voice Award, the Kathy Keaton Mountain Top Award from the New York branch of the NAACP, and the Outstanding Women Scientist Award from the Association of Women in Science. And most recently, Jill was named as one of the 1,000 inspiring Black scientists in America. So it is a great, and but I really didn't get to the punchline, and that is that Jill never really forgot that other interest that she had at Purchase, and that's dance. And one of the things that Jill has developed and really pioneered is something called choreostorming. She teaches a class for non-majors called Choreographing DNA. And that has become one of her major interests besides science. And that's, I think, the subject of her presentation tonight. So without any further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce Jill Bargonetti. Joe, you can unmute yourself.
Thank you, Joe, for that really lovely introduction. It's so nice to be here with you this evening and with everybody else here. Thank you all for coming to hear me share about my love for choreostorming, which is what I'm going to tell you about this evening. And I'm going to tell you about choreostorming because I love thinking spatially and I love thinking through dance. And so I decided it was a great way to introduce science to students and try to help them to have the same passion for it that I do. So I'm going to begin by sharing a PowerPoint and telling you a little bit of my trajectory, while also having all of you learn about choreostorming and maybe create some of your own choreo poems for choreostorming about the DNA relationship to cancer. So how did I come to this idea of choreostorming? I've decided to tell it as a story through time and the inspirations that caused it to be. And a major inspiration for it is Ntozake Shange's choreo poem. And in 1975, before I headed off to college, but this is definitely part of my development process, Ntozake Shange wrote a choreo poem called For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough. And it was a highly influential piece of storytelling where she used poetry, dance, music, song to tell about the experience of Black women. And there were lots of vignettes. And so I was introduced to this. It was all around, the posters were all around, but it hadn't yet really touched my life until I got to college and beyond. And in college, I was, as you heard, a dance major for a time, in addition to being a science major for a time. And while I was in college, I was taught by an amazing dance historian whose name was Sally Baines. She recently passed away. And Sally Baines taught us using a book that she published in 1980 called Terpsichorean Sneakers, which described postmodern dance, which can be everything, walking the sidewalks, walking the streets, and introduced us to it with all of the major modern dancers of the time who were experimenting with postmodern dance. And she was brilliant and she was inspirational. And I never lost my love for this idea of postmodern dance. And so choreostorming is really the melding of choreopoem science and this idea of using postmodern dance to teach genome information flow through movement, making it clear that every person is a mover, every person is a thinker of science, and we can all use movement to express science and help us learn more about the bodies that we're in. And nowadays, everybody is really speaking about mRNA with mRNA vaccines and DNA and PCR. All of these words are actually part of the public lexicon, unfortunately, because of COVID. So there are many things that we speak about in our class that are common knowledge now. So with that, I have some words for you all to think about. I will put them here. You can jot some of them down. And I've made analogies. So the analogy of gene, because you all hear about genes and often we think about them as the beginning. So if you can think about them as a word that they maybe substitute for DNA, people use it all the time now as if it means the same thing as heart. It's in my DNA. They mean it's kind of in my heart, it's in my soul. But the heart and soul are really this idea of DNA then gives RNA, and then protein is the function. But with gene mutations, that's evolution. And that's what happens in cancer because it's the dysfunction. It's this evolution that causes dysfunction. So using these words as you think about your choreo poem and trying to use, you know, all of them, but of course some of the science ones, and then considering tone, rhythm, movement, teaching people that they all can understand this. They can make the words soft. They can make them loud, they can syncopate. So it's teaching all of this and then walking, running, and skipping. And so this is where we begin the class. This is how we begin with choreostorming, and students learn about genome information flow. So this is going to be your assignment. So I'm giving a talk, but I'm also trying to teach about choreostorming and hoping that you all can think about where you might create your own choreo poem to choreostorm your understanding of cancer biology, or you could use it for COVID biology. So this year, of course, during COVID, it was very difficult to teach a dance class where we might move together in space, which had always been the case with bodies touching to emulate how molecules touch inside a cell. And we had to move it to Central Park, and we had to move it to Zoom. So for our audience, for our presentation where we help to teach others about the science of cancer biology, so it becomes a place where people touched by cancer can learn about it, we had to move it to Zoom. So I'm going to show you at the end some examples from Zoom, or one example from Zoom and one example from what it was like when we were in person. In person, it was very different. The students could touch each other, move. The course was taught in a dance space in a black box theater. It's also a film space, but this year it was taught in Central Park. So it has the ability to move around. It just like choreostorming, just like postmodern dance, it has the ability to be done anywhere. And this pandemic made me recognize that and learn that as well, along with the students. So in 1980, when I was graduating from high school, when this whole process was starting, as I said, Ntozake Shange's play was a big hit. It was on Broadway. And I was headed off to college, not thinking that I was going to ever run my own laboratory or be teaching choreostorming. I was just in the business of being a woman child and enjoying life, dancing, learning science, and luckily got a very, very good background and headed off to a college where people could appreciate all that I brought to the table, and as Joe said, encouraged me almost maybe against my will to go to graduate school. And that was brought about in part because the dance building, those of you who know Purchase, this is the beautiful dance building. The beautiful dance building sits adjacent, directly adjacent to a science building. And in that beautiful dance building, I was learning from Sally Baines and others about John Cage and Merce Cunningham, who were teaching that our business in living is to become fluent with the life we're living, and that art could help in this. And so I was thinking about art, thinking about dance, but was also thinking about science. And I would run from that dance building directly to the science building on the bell schedule in my dance clothes and take the dance class and take the science class, or move from the science class in the dance clothes and go over to the dance building. So it was back and forth. And so I did try to choreograph some science at Purchase, but it did not succeed. But it always stayed in the back of my mind as something that I wanted to do. Now, fast forward in 1980, they were talking about cloning genes. By 2016, we're talking about CRISPR. There's always change afloat, how we're working and engineering the DNA. And I'm sure in 10 more years, there will be many more changes, but it's always very exciting. So how do we excite students in this? Well, I felt by teaching them the way I had been excited through this combination of dance and science and putting it all together. And what better way to do that than by being a mentor for them for dance and science? For me, I had one of the most amazing dance choreographer mentors, my primary dance mother mentor, Diane McIntyre, who's the director or was the director of Diane McIntyre's Sounds in Motion. She has choreographed for Broadway. She's choreographed for film. She's choreographed for her own dance company. She's choreographed for her own single dances. She is super passionate, and she really inspired me to be an independent career person. She knew what she wanted and she went after it. And even though I wasn't quite sure what I wanted at that time, I was able to continue working with her while I was actually dancing while I was in school, working with other mentors. And so this was in 1984. I hadn't yet graduated from college. Because I went into the dance company, I had to leave the dance program as a major and finish up my studies as a biology major, commuting between SUNY Purchase and New York so that I could finish my degree. And that was in part brought about by Elise Craddock, who had her collaborator slash husband who was working at NYU. And she was able to get me placed in his lab to do my senior thesis project so that I could dance in the city and only commute to Purchase 1 or 2 days a week to finish up my coursework. So they actually did give me the application, tell me to fill it out. I kept balking, but I did it. And then after graduate school, I went off to Columbia University and had another fabulous female science mentor, and that was Carol Previs. I've also had some amazing male mentors. So I think people need a village of mentors to bring about this creative thought process. You met Joe. So Joe got me into my first laboratory, had me do a summer stint at NYU Rusk Medical Center. I just sent a student off there. She'll be doing a summer program there with actually the same person running the program who ran it when I was there. I don't know how he could still be doing it, but that's a very interesting story. And then my PhD mentor, Richard Novick. So it was all these different pieces, all these different people helping to mentor me that really inspired me to be that kind of mentor, but to be able to mentor in all those things in one way. And that brought me to this idea of using choreostorming and helping through it, thinking about bringing the passion of the laboratory. This is where my laboratory is, bringing the passion of the laboratory, the same passion I bring to my laboratory team where we're working at the bench, to the non-major student or the student who might become a major. So many of the students who come into the class for choreostorming are freshmen. They've just entered school. They haven't decided what their major is going to be yet. And they enter into this scenario thinking. And so to get them that first semester in choreographing genomics and teach them choreostorming, and then speak to them about becoming a science major, speak to them about becoming biology majors, really plants a seed. And the last group that I actually had in the Black Box Theater, 3 of those students are currently working in my laboratory. So it really did the job, and it really helped to recruit them, and they're all brilliant Macaulay Honors students. And so the class, while it's meant to be usable by non-major students, if they take it, that can be their science credit or one of the science credits they need. If they take it and they decide to become a science major, as long as they're a Macaulay Honors student, they can use it towards their honors credit. And so that works quite well. So what I'd like to do now is just to share with you some of what this looks like. First, in the actual space when they were all together. These are from this group. 3 of these students are the ones working in my lab now, and then show you how we can also use choreostorming in the scenario of online or outside in Central Park, which actually brings more of the postmodern dance idea to it in some ways. So here is the 2019 class, and then I'll give you one example from the 2020 class. Okay, I'm going to stop that one there. If we have some time, I might come back to another piece of it, but I really want you to see how this year each student had to do their own thing. They couldn't work together.
Before you make an outfit, you need to make fabric. Before you make fabric, you start with thread. The same for us. Before bodies are formed, we start with cells. And before cells, we have our thread. It's made, from your point of view, from right to left, but most importantly, 5' to 3' for the top. At the bottom, it's also made 5' to 3' in the same direction as the top. Nucleotides link like puzzle pieces, amino ends attached to hydroxyl ends, 5' to 3'. This happens in set pairs. A goes with T, C goes with G, sometimes 2 Gs go with 2 Cs, or 3 As go with 3 Ts. These nucleotide strands may seem endless as they are extended and spiral with each other. And just like that, you have made a gene. Made of DNA, the blueprint for a protein. In this case, a tumor suppressor. Right. What's a tumor suppressor? We depend on 2 types of genes to make sure we don't make too much of one type of cell: proto-oncogenes and tumor suppressors. We call them cancer critical genes because when they function properly, they prevent cancer from forming. Proto-oncogenes can change into oncogenes when their DNA gets mutated. Once they become oncogenes, they are able to work more. In other words, they gain function. This can help cells to divide when they're not supposed to. Tumor suppressors do the opposite of proto-oncogenes. They stop cells from dividing. When their genetic blueprints are mutated, they can lose powers of suppression. In other words, they lose function. Having too many workaholic proteins or too many cells that are no longer working can be a problem, as this can lead to lots of cells being made. If you have too many cells, you can form a mass that grows into an adenoma, that grows into cancer. Back to our gene, the APC gene. APC, tumor suppressor, APC, APC. APC, always produce copies. No. APC, any possible change. No. APC, a participating gene that is involved in the development of cancer. There we go. A mutation doesn't mean cancer, even though it's scary. A mutation doesn't mean cancer, even though it's scary. Products from mutated genes have faulty blueprints. Complications happen when signals don't go through. Connections happen on the WNT pathway, more like a relay race than an actual path. The APC gene from chromosome 5 makes a protein with the same name. Problematic changes are on somatic cells, the ones that are used for everything but reproduction. One of these cells has 2 pairs of every gene. This does not mean that mutations can't be passed down. One of these cells has 2 pairs of every gene. We go from DNA to RNA to protein. The APC gene is often inactivated by mutations, but we have another copy. One mutation doesn't mean cancer. Signal comes in, APC protein reads it, connects it with beta-catenin. Cell decides to not divide. WNT. Relay race. When the protein isn't working, communication doesn't happen. Cells divide, mass grows, cancer happens in stages if not caught. It takes more than one mutation. Mom had it. Mom's cousin had it. Now me. Way to pass the baton, you guys. She said it's early. She said we caught it on time. She said it hasn't spread. She said it's very likely that things will be okay. She seems to know what she's talking about. She said to keep her informed. She's your doctor, for crying out loud. Trust her. It's a communication issue. Instructions aren't being passed down. They don't know when to stop. Fuck. She said it's early. Treatment is better since Mom had it. She said we caught it on time. She said it hasn't spread. I want a reset. Mom had it. Mom's cousin had it. Now me. Maybe if I had quit smoking earlier, if I had exercised more, slept more. She said it's not your fault. People survive this. She says you did the right thing by screening. She says we caught it on time. Signals aren't getting through, so things are happening. It's a communication thing. Hey, babe. Yeah, I'm done. Not good news. Are you home? I'll be right there.
So I hope that that helped to communicate some of how changes to the DNA, how DNA works, how changes to how it works can be part of this process for cancer. And when people find out they have cancer, they're also often told what genes are associated, what genetic changes have happened, or what is going to be targeted in their treatment. And so what we help to do within the student group and people touched by cancer who come to talk to us or see the presentations through Choreostorming is to work with others to think about this and to think about how we can express the emotions of a cancer diagnosis, the biology of cancer. And so this is where I started with you on some of these words that you could use. If there's anything you would like to express through Choreostorming or try to understand, it really helps as the students are working with these, or as other people who have come to our workshops have brought them to the table to help process or work through or ask questions, and then utilize the movements and the interactions with others to help understand what's going on. And so I leave you with these words, and we'll stop to answer any questions you have about the process of genetic biology within cancer. I haven't talked about the particular gene I study, which is P53, but I know a lot about other genes that are involved in cancer as well. Or questions about choreostorming, or how I came to this process, or what the students think of choreostorming. And so with that, I will stop sharing my screen, and I will open the floor for any discussion or questions that you might have.
Jill, do you see choreostorming as an educational tool for citizens?
So I do see it as an educational tool for citizens. I am in the mind that everyday people certainly understand enough about these pieces of language and the thoughts of how they move them. And I think that sometimes their ideas within it actually bring ideas back to the scientists. We've had that happen as well when citizens have come and thought about these processes or the therapies that they're receiving, and danced it in certain ways that were not things that we perhaps would have thought of. So I think it goes in both directions. I think it works as a way for citizen scientists to think about concepts, but also as a way to potentially shift the thinking of a scientist or somebody who just thinks of themselves just as a scientist as they're moving. So I think it goes to bring citizens to the dance and science together, and scientists to the dance and science together. It's a unifier. That's what I hope. It helps to unify the communities.
Jill, have you, to just pick up on that, have you spent any time, or some of your students spent time working with younger students? I work in elementary and middle schools in the Bronx, and I joined this fascinated with the potential for using dance to introduce ideas of science more deeply, more personally, more physically to students.
So it's funny that you asked that. So I had written with a high school teacher for being part of the New York Academy of Sciences, Scientists in the Classroom this year. And so I am a scientist in the classroom at a charter high school. And the students are currently working on their choreostorms. They'll be presenting them on Friday to the group over Zoom. It was really interesting to watch what they're doing. And of course, I tell them there's no wrong in what they do. And they are expressing the central dogma. And then the last part is about cancer. And some of them are bringing their music to it. In order to help them think about it, we took them to an online dance performance of Dance Africa, which uses a lot of rhythm and storytelling. So we are working on that and introduce them to Ntozake Shange. So really trying to introduce them to this, and the school is in the Bronx. So I can invite you, if you're interested, you can send me an email. I think that people can come to the performance on
Terrific.
Friday. It's from 1 to 3:30. And so it's basically New York Academy of Sciences, but on Zoom.
Great. I would love to. If your email is available in the...
It's available online. It's super long, but if you go to my website, you'll be able to find
Okay,
it.
I'll be in touch. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Other questions? Jill, I was wondering, how long have you been teaching this non-majors course?
So I've done, I believe now 6 groups of the course. So one year it was twice, I did it twice, but now I only teach it once academic year. So it is a fall course.
And it looked like it's kind of a small group.
Well, this year was very, very small because of COVID. I think people were afraid that I said it was going to be hybrid. So it was one of the few classes that was listed as hybrid. Most classes were listed as online only, but I felt that I felt that I needed to see them. Perhaps I didn't, and I would have had a really big class, but it would have been more challenging for me because I had not worked something like this on Zoom. So we did get to work together, and then they were on Zoom. I've had as many as 20, and this year as little as 6.
20 must be quite a chore. I don't want to say chore, but quite a kind of keeps you busy, I would say, with 20 students in a class where you have to be, kind of working with them all the time.
Yes, when you saw all of them on the floor doing the rhythm, we had about 20 in that class. It was a lot of students, a lot of choreographies to watch, a lot of bodies to help them deal with in space, but they did a great job. I mean, I have more stuff I can share, but I didn't want to take up all the time just sharing all the things that they have done. I wanted to be able to talk about it and answer questions for people. But it is different every time, and it develops, I think, with the times, and that's what is so interesting about it, because it has the capacity to develop even more. Who thought that we were going to have COVID and I was going to learn along with them how to create dance on Zoom, how to use all these forms. I think the young people are very into TikTok and all these other things. So for them, it was probably easier than for me.
Interesting. I was also wondering, because I kind of lost track a little bit of the thread from when you were in high school, college, and then dancing. And I guess I didn't realize that you were actually dancing while you were, in a sense, finishing up your senior project.
Yes. I mean, that's why I had to leave the dance program. So it was at the time when I was at Purchase, I don't know if they still do it. It's a conservatory. So when you're performing, you're in the dance corps at Purchase. So I have a few, mementos from being in the dance corps, and you're not allowed to dance professionally. And so when I was accepted into the dance company, I had to make a choice. whether I would stay in the dance corps at Purchase or I would go be with Diane McIntyre. And it was an easy decision to go be with Diane McIntyre. But going to be with Diane McIntyre Sounds in Motion meant that I had to leave the dance program, and I decided I had to get a degree. And that was a great thing because I ended up with this biology degree, but also I was able to study with Chris Gronkowski. I think I can't say her name correctly, in philosophy for a year, because I couldn't fit physics into my schedule. So I didn't get a BS, I got a Bachelor of Arts, and I took the history and philosophy of science, where I got to learn a lot about the different pieces of arts and thought that go into science. So I was thinking about science. So, you know, all of that thinking about how one thinks about science and thinking about dance and how dance brings that thinking to science. There was a lot of philosophy in my thoughts about science. And then when I went off to NYU, Gerald Holton, who taught an amazing philosophy of science class, he's actually from Harvard. I took his class at NYU to think more about the philosophy of science and started writing about the melding of art and science. So it's something that's been on in my thought processes in terms of the philosophy of how a scientist thinks and how artists think in scientific ways with surrealism and other types of art form. So how they really do meld, but people don't often think critically about how they melt.
Other questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
Hi.
Hi.
So I actually just switched my major from dance to biology because of COVID. And after taking biology, I've just been so fascinated with the choreography within a cell. And I'm so fascinated about cell biology and going more into depth with that. And what drew you to cancer biology?
So I was really interested in DNA. I mean, I've always been so interested in DNA, in part because it helps me explain my own world as a mixed race individual. It was always trying to understand how heredity is controlled. And then when I was doing my PhD thesis, I was working with bacteria and the replication of bacteria. Bacteria replicate really rapidly. Like viruses, but viruses need a cell to replicate. And it's just so fascinating how the DNA replicates. And when you think about the movement, how fast that is. So fast, you can't even begin to get bodies in space to do what happens inside the cell. It's just too complex to do, but it was just so fascinating to me. And when I was finishing up my PhD thesis, I wanted to do something that, one, was fundable, and two, had an impact on humanity in a certain way. So at the time, HIV/AIDS was our pandemic. I graduated from my PhD thesis in 1990, and was really the AIDS crisis was huge. And so I wasn't quite sure whether I was going to study AIDS or cancer. But I went on to, there were a lot of things, you know, things that end up in your path that just took me to cancer rather than AIDS. And then I tried to meld the two together, but that didn't go so well because AIDS was also the men's cancer. So there was certainly things that were affecting cancer development in people who had AIDS, and I was trying to understand that. So it was really thinking about what are the pertinent questions of the time and where could my creative thoughts be best utilized. So it seemed like cancer was the place. And it, you know, as Joe said, I mean, I still bring all of these things together. So in terms of my pedagogy and thinking about how to teach it, but also how to think about it, because, and I think you will find this, because I was a dancer, you know, you're thinking about the steps, you go to sleep thinking about the steps, you go to sleep thinking about and marking in your head how, you know, where you're going to be in space. So when you're thinking about the biology and you're thinking about what's the next question, you're marking in your head where you think these things are in the cell. It's very similar to how you mark in your head where you think you're going to be in space. So it's not very different from the process of being a dancer or thinking about the choreography when you're thinking about the science in your head.
Yeah, and I've definitely found that, like, I don't see science as an exercise in memorization anymore. It's more of finding it within your body and within the music and rhythm of nature.
Exactly. And this is what with these high school students now, when they're doing it with the music, I was with them on Zoom and they're all in their places, but they're doing the stuff. And so one student was playing, they had some music and he's playing the keyboard and he says, well, we want to know what you think. And the other student says, well, we thinking we want to go in all these different keys. And I'm like, okay, play it. And they're playing it. And then they said, well, she wants it to go higher. So he starts playing it. And I don't remember what the rhythm was, but it was something like dee 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 dee. And he keeps playing. We're going to repeat it. We're going to repeat it. And I said, yeah, you can do that. It makes me feel really good, but I don't think you should do it and make me feel really good when you get to the process of cancer. I think you have to change it. And they were like, oh. Okay. So, you know, I'm dying to see what they end up doing and what they decide to do with it. But, you know, having all these heads together in one place in their own space, but they're all thinking, so, you know, some of them are like, oh, we're going to do this with our arms. So, you know, they don't have to write anything, but it's all happening in their head, which is what you want.
Interesting. Other questions? We have about 10 more minutes. So don't,
I have a question.
go ahead.
Hi, I actually went to purchase for dance and now I'm taking science classes at Hunter, so that's kind of funny. But I recently came across the Dance Your PhD stuff, and it was interesting how they use dance as a form of research, kind of. And I was wondering if you had any experience with that or any opinions about it.
So I think it's a great thing. I've watched a lot of those. Sometimes the scientists who do Dance Your PhD don't do their own dancing and they get other people to do it. But I think as it's developed more, they are more and more doing their own movement. And I think it probably helps them think about their PhD thesis in great form, but I have not had any students who have done a PhD with me who have yet decided to dance their PhD. I wish somebody would, but they're great. I love it. I wrote a paper recently about choreostorming, and I cite them and what they do with Dance Your PhD. It was certainly part of the inspiration. I think it's a fabulous thing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great question.
Are you attempting to imitate the biophysical activity at the cellular level on a dance level?
It doesn't have to be specific. So it doesn't have to all be some biophysical. When I teach the students, there are certain things where they do have to be in particular areas of space for me to tell that they understand. Synthesis, for example, we do a lot of 5' to 3' synthesis and ideas of some of the enzymology, which I expect something to be correct and for them to understand and know which nucleotides are matching to which direction, anti-parallel direction, PCR. But biophysics, no, because we're not able to do the movements in space the way I would love them to be, or with that capacity. And in the classroom, they haven't yet learned it in a way that would necessarily make that clear. So I don't feel that we have to set that up, but we have done some movement experiments with them where we try to set certain specific rules occasionally, but when they do their assignments, they don't have rules. Just like when I'm speaking to the students, the high school students, where I say there is no wrong at this point, I want them to use that choreo poem. So the poem is very important. They have to create a poem, and it has to have some logic, and it has to be correct for the science when it's in that class. But no, it doesn't have to have all the correct biophysics.
Well, it sure has the potential for the patient population, I think, to demystify cancer. And I don't know if you're thinking of it in a therapy setting, but it might.
Yeah, I am thinking about that, and I've talked to some people about collaborative grant type mechanisms to help it reach out. But I would, that would probably be working with people who could help to get to communities who would want to bring it into their community.
Great.
This is Sue Ellen. Good evening. Thank you so much, Jill, for this presentation. Peter, you provided a perfect introduction to an observation I've had of my experience at Purchase. I was a 1977 grad in microbiology, but also minored in dance. So I studied with Lee Ehrman, and at the time I enjoyed incredible space in the Natural Sciences building where I had my own walk-in incubator and a lot of fruit flies. And then I had danced before, stopped to be a cheerleader, and then came back to dance at Purchase, thank God. And I've spent a lot of time since in healthcare and medicine. It was an isolating time to be in that lab, and there were really only, I don't know, Joe, you can tell us, maybe 15 juniors and seniors. It was tiny and wonderful. But for me, it really was the connection that I think the work that you're doing is getting at, which is between this tiny little, these tiny microscopic basic building blocks of life and this very rich humanity that I was also living with, right? I mean, it really pulled it for me. I never really thought while I was analyzing two seniors dance project as my own minor project that it really had any connection to where I was coming from, but since then it certainly has. So that whole thread from what are the origins, where is translational research, what does it bring to us to suggest that we must continue to explore at a level that is really unknown to many, but is the basis of our humanity. I mean, it threads together quite nicely. I owe that to Purchase in many respects. That culture of thinking that it really all does go together somehow. Certainly not just, gee, I always say, gee, I studied microbiology, but I was also a dance major. It was a little more whole experience. And just watching the piece earlier, I thought, well, I didn't really try to figure out how rickettsia was an interorder transfer, how I might dance that. But it certainly came to me then, and then I carried through the fact that having that experience and looking at it from all sides as somewhat an isolated science person to this robust humanity and how it all connects was really powerful. I do think based on some of what Jenny had to say, Mackenzie as well, it really does make you think about the connectivity of it all and how that is in many respects, isn't that an educator's goal beyond just organic chemistry? Biochemistry fascinated me. Organic chemistry nearly killed me. Thank God I could dance. On the other hand, how it all came together later and later has made much more sense. It's a great experience to have when you're young, I think. And Jill, I don't know how.
Even when you're not so young. I didn't point out the name of the dancer. His name is Juan de la Rosa. He was a professional dancer and has now come to the sciences and he hadn't danced in about 6 years, I think he said. He's going into healthcare, and he needed one more science class to apply to a healthcare program that he wants to get in. And so I think he will be bringing this to the community of healthcare. You know, so I think as we begin to build a group who, you know, more people who take it out there, there's certainly people who are working with dance across ages, dances across abilities, and using movement to help express things to patients. So I just think this can be fluid and really a unifier.
You know, the other thing that came up for me is that both my science, getting through organic chemistry, but also that lab work, that real hands-on bench work, and the discipline that was involved in dance. I had a very disciplined life at Purchase. You know, 8 o'clock organic chemistry in your seat, right? And I also, dance is certainly discipline. And somewhere in the middle of that were a lot of humanities and social sciences people running around and visual artists. But the discipline of both, and yet at different ends of the spectrum, is also something I've reflected on since. Just putting it out there in very different ways. Attention span, but also just showing up, and what it took to do that. And it was very unstructured at the time. So really an 8 o'clock class for an hour and a half, 3 times a week in organic chemistry we were considered out of our minds, right? Others were.
I'm actually laughing because I know the instructor very, very well, Nadim Shah.
Yes.
And he was quite a he was a great organic chemist, but he was a great teacher.
Well, Joe, you may recall. So speaking of movement, he was a squash champ.
Yes.
And so he taught on 3 different boards. So if you weren't paying attention, he would quickly move like molecules from one board to the next. It was a pleasure to have him. But boy, did he move around the room at 8. So he was a dancer himself, I guess.
I think we're at 8:30, but do we have any other questions? Any other burn?
Really was a pleasure. I want to thank you all for all your wonderful comments and questions, and being so engaged in this event. And thank you for coming.
Thank you, Jill, very much. Let's give a hand to Jill for a great
thank you.
Great presentation. Jill, it was great to see you again.
Thank you. Great to see you too, Joe.
And we'll be talking in the future, because Jill and I are going to do a little collaboration for new underrepresented minority faculty in the SUNY system. So
yeah, I can talk about that too. There aren't very many of us in the sciences.
Terrific.
When is that event in the Bronx?
Oh, the event, you mean for the New York Academy of Sciences?
Yeah.
That is happening this Friday from 1 to 3:30.
All right.
I missed that. Okay.
Thank you all very much.
That is early enough that it doesn't interfere with reunion that will be happening.
Okay, very good. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jill, so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.